Hi, everyone, and warmly welcome to our podcast on inclusive labor markets with us at Mitt and our super special guests that will join us for talks about the D&I. And the purpose of this interview series is to get behind the scenes and learn more about D&I from a CEO perspective. So you will have the chance to meet some amazing CEOs of the largest companies and get their view on why D&I and how walk the talk. But for you who doesn't know much about us or nothing at all, we have been around with Mitt since 2008. And our vision is to work for an inclusive society and a labor market that values diversity. And if you want to learn more about us, you can check out our homepage, mittliv.com. But today we have the big honor to have a true role model joining us for this conversation, who have a lot of experience about leadership. So warmly welcome Joakim Skarborg, CEO for Novax.
Thank you very much. I was looking for someone else after your very kind and generous introduction, but thank you. Very glad to be here.
You're just humble. So how are you today, Joakim? What feeling did you wake up with this morning?
Today, I'm great. I woke up with a sense of energy and sort of time in my schedule. We've had some very intense weeks leading up until late last night. And today I'm a little bit refreshed and feel that I have time to really get down to doing stuff I've been putting aside for a while. So good.
Nice. And we've been working some together now, and I've noticed you work a lot. You worked late yesterday and you woke up refreshed, but do you ever, wake up with a negative feeling, or is there any room for you and your role to have a bad day?
Interesting question. Well, first of all, yes, I certainly wake up with negative feelings sometimes. Some wise person recently told me to start by sort of positive affirmation, the first thing you do every morning. So I've actually been a little bit mindful about thinking about a few positive things the first thing I do when I wake up, and that actually helps a little bit, sets a good tone for the rest of the day. Is there room for having a bad day? Well, at work, not really. I think I take pride in being very much the same person at home and at work, but obviously sometimes I have to let out frustration somewhere, and I unfortunately tend to save that for the people I treasure most, which is my family and friends, because I do think at work as a leader, and perhaps even more so as an owner and sort of sometimes chairman or a board member in one of our companies, we need to inspire rigidity, positivism, instill courage, and also calm in our companies. So there's not a ton of room. On the other hand, I do really think that being human is part of building a successful culture. So it's absolutely okay to not have a fantastic day. And I think it's also even okay to say that, but then you have to be able to put that aside when you're working on specific issues.
So what do you think of when you think of something positive, when you do your affirmation?
Well, I find it quite easy to find pleasure in things, challenges, gadgets, stuff, fun meetings, the workout I'm going to do, paddle game I'm going to play. So there's always something. It doesn't have to be, I revert back to my mental happy place. It can be anything. There's always something in the calendar every day that you can find a positive spin around. So I don't think it's that difficult at all.
No, and I think maybe that mindset is also one of the reasons behind that people like you or you as a person has come so far as CEO. But would you like to share some about what are the milestones in life that brought you to this kind of leadership role?
Sure. Some important milestones. I think if you want to Well, let's put it this way. If core values are important to you, Axel Johnson is a good place to reside in. And I think we have very purposely built a values-driven culture and organization at Novax. And I think people tend to work here and work with us in companies for specifically that reasons. I mean, there are obviously other reasons as well, but I think that is a key component to why you want to partner with us in some way. So for me, sort of realizing that core values and overlap in core values are important to me has been a journey throughout my my career, and I think it started even with my first job, where I was supposed to go work for an unmentioned investment bank in London, where I actually got out before the job started because I felt, after having spent time with them, that the culture wasn't really in line with my core values. And that is not to say it was, you know, negative or bad in any ways, but the overlap wasn't really there. And then throughout my career, I have been in cultures and contexts where I felt that despite working hard and despite delivering results, I did not get the sense of completion or a sort of sense of purpose that I was looking for. And I guess around my, around when I turned 30, I very much realized that that was the problem. Sort of that was the missing link, rather. And I started looking intentfully for a culture which was closer to my beliefs and the behaviors that I valued. And that led me to Axel Johnson. And then, yeah, the rest is history.
And what is your most important personal value then?
I think it's definitely around being kind and caring for each other. Sorry, just some noise in the background. Being kind, caring for each other, acting with good intent, and realizing we have to find win-win situations when we engage in any transaction, whether it's acquiring a company or agreeing with in a board or hiring a person. There has to be an intrinsic sort of synergy in what we do. Otherwise, it's actually a zero-sum game where somebody wins and somebody loses, and that is not long-term. I would say perhaps the last keyword would be sort of a long-term mindset. Let's think about doing something good over the long haul, and also take some responsibility for pushing out the world and our societies in a direction that we think is beneficial and helpful for the planet.
That is so inspiring. And also, I think inclusion and changing behaviors is not a quick fix. So it takes time to change and change things to the better. But Axel Johnson has this pretty very ambitious goals around D&I, and you have your everyday life going on at Novax. So what are the gaps as you see it, and how do you approach those gaps?
Good question. I think it's very important to be outspoken and visionary and being able to sort of paint the picture of where we're going and why we think it's important. I think the gaps are not so much around, what to do, but it boils down to, in many instances, in people changing their everyday behaviors. And I don't know about you, but it's hard to change your behavior. That definitely goes for me. And so I think that's the problem. making sure we are mindful about what we do and what the result of how we act, the results of how we act are, and sort of the constant nudging in the right direction. And to get there, I think knowledge, we need to be aware. I mean, we've been talking with you guys a lot about unconscious bias, and that's tricky because they're unconscious, right? We're doing things that we shouldn't be doing, but we're not aware that we're sending some signal. So step one is sort of understanding. And we don't have to, I don't think we have to strive to be perfect in every aspect, but we should at least know some of the major pitfalls. And I think consistency in sort of training and information is important. The other thing is really keeping ourselves accountable, person by person, but perhaps even more importantly, using a little bit of peer pressure and making sure the groups that we belong to at work, agree and hold each other accountable for displaying that behavior. But for me, those are the big gaps. I think most people know, or at least they have an intent and a desire to be inclusive and create safe spaces. And I think some of us have had the benefit of understanding a little bit more about unconscious bias and some things we should avoid. But to get that into your instincts, that's the trick. And that's a fairly complicated problem.
It is. But what would you say is the typical pitfalls, as you mentioned?
Well, I think it resides around, instinct, acting on instinct in usually quite stressful situations, or actually perhaps not even that. It's making sure that we take the time to reflect upon whether, what signals am I sending out, and hopefully eventually those, that reflecting becomes part of our instincts, and we actually don't have to pause and think every time. And I think, very few people intentfully want to exclude anyone. So that's one thing. The other thing is, if looking at me, I grew up in Stockholm, born in the late 70s. The world was very different then in many aspects, and we were sort of molded or shaped into forms that is at the core of who we are. And some of those behaviors, looking through sort of the lens of today, they're not up to par. And you have to dig quite deep to change and affect that. And that's a tricky process. So I think it's a grind. It's an everyday struggle, and it has to be a constantly present sort of debate. And it has to be constantly on our radars, in our companies and in our teams.
And what, you've been at Novax for a while, so how has your journey at Novax looked like when it comes to D&I? What has happened since you started until today, and what do you see is necessary to change ahead to make this successful?
Well, I think one thing is we're quite a small team here at Novax. We own 28 companies, and in those companies, several thousand people work. So that is the full extent of our ecosystem. But here at Novax, there's only 13, 14 of us. So I think we have two contexts to work with, and the Novax context of the team here centrally, that's one thing, and it's a small enough group that we can actually get traction and results quite quickly, if we have the right ideas and right processes in place. And I think we're starting to sort of get there, but we're also quite a homogeneous group in terms of background, education, socioeconomic status. So perhaps that blinds us a little bit. But that's one thing. I think the big impact we can have is how we interact with and how we can affect our larger ecosystem. As owners and board members, we are in some aspects we're role models, or at least we have an outsized impact. And I think what we've been trying to do over the last few years is put some requirements in place and put some demands on our companies.
Can you tell us some about that?
Sure. So we have a little bit of a broad, for us, D&I is part of our sustainability scope. And what we've told our companies, it's 28 companies in various stages of maturity, various locations around Europe, and in a bunch of various industries. So we've had to come up with something, at least the least common denominator. What can we make relevant and reasonable for each and every one of our companies? And what we can't include there, we expect our companies to work on individually. But so we've said, step one, knowledge and understanding. We need to make sure that all our leaders and over time, all the people in all our organizations are aware of what D&I means and stands for. We need to understand what an unconscious bias is, and we need to be able to agree on what we qualify as good behavior. So step one is knowledge, and we've actually introduced some tools that we have access to through Mitt, but also through Axel Johnson resources, where we can provide some training and information around all these things. So step one, make sure people understand and know. Step two, make sure that when we recruit and build our teams, we need to be working with sort of best-in-class tools and processes to make sure we are as unbiased as possible when we recruit, so we get access to the full talent pool and that we don't discriminate against any individual for any reason that doesn't make sense. Obviously, when it comes to experience or capabilities or knowledge, we can definitely filter and sort to make sure we find the right people. But when it comes to other aspects of who a person is, we should be as unbiased as possible. So we've also provided some tools there in terms of best practice, but also some software tools where you can, or process tools where you can actually migrate candidates throughout a process without sort of getting caught up in biases. So those are two key preconditions in our minds. And then the third and last demand or requirement we put in our companies is engaged in civil society. Both as a company, find something that's meaningful to you where you can positively contribute to diversity and inclusion in the civil society, but also provide time for the employees to engage as individuals during work hours. And it doesn't have to be 3 days a week, but at least some time every month to do something.
That's great.
So we were quite happy and proud over this. And then we sort of assembled all our key leaders and board members and advisors and management teams. And we sort of communicated this, and we felt we provided a lot of things. But I have to say, this was about a year ago, and the sort of the adoption and the traction we've been having has been disappointing. We haven't been getting the results we wanted. And I definitely think it's not for lack of sort of will, but it's most of our companies are fairly small, fastly growing. This falls into the bucket of, important but not urgent for many, right or wrong, but I understand how that can happen. So what we're doing now is we've actually employed a person at the Novax level who will spend a good part of her time trying to more proactively drive this. And we've actually built up a workshop format and some more tools. And we've made our time available to our companies to actually get started. And hopefully this will then integrate into the company processes. But it is tricky. And I think this is something we can all recognize. And when you have to work sort of indirectly to other companies, it's even trickier.
Yeah, and I think we have been in this for 15 years now. So I think the conclusion is that the ones who saying it's easy, they lie. It's a journey, and it's a journey that actually never ends, because value, the discussion of and working with values is something that needs to be the core forever. So it's not a project that ends. But I'm curious, can you see anywhere in any of your investments or organizations the correlation between profitability and D&I? Do you have any real case that you have measured or followed up that you directly can see the correlation to profitability?
The answer is no, unfortunately. And I think it's for two reasons. One is we haven't been measuring it. But the other one is, I think our sample size is a little bit small. And these are organizations, we typically invest in small and medium-sized companies, and then sort of try to help them accelerate their growth and their development. And there just hasn't been, again, it sort of falls into a bucket of important but not urgent. I think that's one thing. Another thing is, I think this is very much a long game. And I think if you build a very diverse team, you actually increase complexity. But I also think you raise the bar for what you can achieve over time. But to have a very diverse organization, no matter how you define diversity, I think requires a fairly strong culture and a strong alignment in core values, and that takes some time to build up. And if you're growing and adding more and more people all the time, it's a bit like, eventually you'll catch up, but it's going to take some time. I'm a very strong believer that we build much, much better and more resilient and future-proof businesses by being very good at making sure our teams are diverse and have a broad set of experiences and capabilities and life experiences as well. So I mean, it doesn't mean there is no correlation. I'm sure it is, but we haven't been able to monitor or see it.
No, and I like that you actually lift that up, because it's honest, and I think many of the leaders and people who will listen to this podcast will be able to recognize in this challenge that you mentioned. So I also think that, I mean, it's important to lift those very hands-on, inspiring cases to more, but still we need to be honest about the challenges and the pitfalls that we all face around us to be able to approach it in the right way.
I agree, and I do think. Sorry for interrupting, but I do think. I mean, one thing is we need to be patient. I think this will certainly prove itself, beyond any doubt over time. But I feel now that we talk about it, that this is actually something we should take a look at and see. We haven't been sort of doing the analysis either. But my gut feel is that we have a bunch of companies that are quite diverse, that are doing quite well. And interestingly enough, it tends to be companies who are dependent on skills that are short in supply. One example would be sort of software engineers. Everyone needs software engineers. In order to be able to cope with that, we've been recruiting way beyond our geographical borders, and we've been working with teams, located elsewhere, etc. And that has proven that is certainly doable, and it actually probably adds to our collective capabilities.
Yeah, that's a good example. But I'm also curious, Joakim, about what are the big trends you see ahead, since all those mega trends that we have around us impact our economies, our businesses and societies in different ways. But what trends do you see that ahead that will impact your business and force you to work with D&I ahead? What are the crucial trends that impacts you?
Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, I think one is certainly the skill shortage, making sure that we can find, attract, and retain the best people for any position out there. That means we have to go look in places we haven't been looking before, and with the digitization and globalization that is happening right now, I think we're also facing a different type of competition than we did 30, 40 years ago. I spent part of my career in New York working for an American company, and I know America certainly has its own problems, but on Manhattan, if you take a look at the diversity in the teams and in the industries I worked in, they were doing fantastically well. They had super diverse teams, and it was all skills based, and they had found a number of ways to make that work. And I think perhaps Sweden and Swedes are a bit at a disadvantage here. We've been a very homogeneous society for a long time, and sort of having to figure out how to set up our society and our companies in a sort of more diverse context is something we've been working at for, I don't know, the last 20, 30 years as compared to many other countries. So I think we're off to a late start, but we can't afford not to catch up very soon.
True. And if you look on your leadership skills, what do you think when it comes to inclusive leadership is the number one crucial behavior you need to have as an inclusive leader?
Is that the $1 million question? I think it's a genuine interest in people and curiosity in people's capabilities, skills, personalities. And I do feel that I think we're genetically programmed to be a little bit, afraid of things that look differently from what we're used to, whether it's, the geography we live in, or the society we live in, or even people with different traditions, languages, habits, whatever. And I think being a bit curious and really wanting to understand who's behind, whatever difference you may see, I think is important. So I think that's one thing. And then I definitely think a strong belief in that diversity makes us stronger, and a respect for the process and the time it takes to make a diverse team, whether it's intellectually diverse or capability diverse or demographically diverse. It's going to take some time to find common grounds, and if you expect that to happen right away, I think you're in for disappointment. You're going to have to be willing to invest a lot more into sort of building a common understanding and building a common definition on acceptable behaviors, etc. And if you're willing to do that, I think the results are well worth sort of the time spent.
But that makes me even more curious about how, I mean, we meet a lot of great leaders in many organizations, but we also meet leaders that truly don't believe in D&I. What does it take to bring those on board to feel this commitment and wanting to do this?
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think that it's impossible to give a general answer to that, but I do think, I mean, if you want to fix a very defined problem in a very short time frame, diversity can be an obstacle. I think it's in a very homogeneous group, as long as you have this, the basic skill sets you need, they can probably get started quicker and they can probably agree quicker. They might miss out in some very key aspects that are important long-term, but for a short-term project or a fairly well-defined task, you may actually decide not to be too diverse. But if you're trying to build a rocket and fly to the moon, I think that's a very different type of project that's going to take many, many years, and you can't afford not to have every single perspective out there before you actually dare to put the person in that rocket and lift off. So I think that's one thing. Like not everything benefits from diversity, but over time, and then the bigger and most important trends and tasks, they definitely will benefit. So I think that's important to understand. What's in the eye of the beholder, when you look at someone's behavior and what are their motivations and instructions, to be fair. So that's a long way of saying I don't really know, but I do think over time it will be bad for business not to be able to sort of build a resilient and diverse culture and team.
And what would you say is, if you choose one tip, the number one for to pass on to other CEOs who wants to start this journey, what would that be? Where should you start?
Mitt, is that too cheap? Yeah. No, but
a little, maybe.
Yeah,
I didn't expect that.
Yeah. No, but I think it's partly true. I think just the conversations we've been having and sort of the information and the education we've been getting from you has been very helpful in sorting out what we're really talking about and what it means. So I do think information and knowledge is definitely the starting point. I also think, personal experiences are very important, and building relationships are also super important. I mean, we can look at a person and think he or she is different, and for any number of reasons. And we can intrinsically feel that, oh, that's going to be complicated. But, build a few relationships. Again, spending 3 years in New York, having our children go to school where they celebrated all sorts of religious holidays and they had friends from all over the world. For them, it's supernatural. Like, that's basic. That's plain vanilla. It's nothing out of the ordinary. And they are forever sort of molded into that form, and that's fantastic. So I also think, like, try to be a bit curious and try to build some relationships outside of the box, and you might be surprised.
Love that. Build relationships outside the box, step outside your comfort zone, and as we say at Mitt, being comfortable, being uncomfortable. So that wraps it up, Joakim. Thank you so much for joining us. I think many will find a lot of inspiration from this honest conversation, and good luck with everything. Wish you a continuously happy day.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Likewise, there are so much more to be said about this topic, but I appreciate having a candid discussion. Thank you.